morning, everyone, on Zoom and on YouTube, and welcome to the Universalist Unitarian Church of Halifax, established in 1837. My name is Jessica Friesen, your music director and service leader today, and Reverend Norm Horofker is our minister and will be back next week. Marie-Claude Leroux is our Director of Religious Exploration, and John Piccolo is our volunteer technician. Brian Gifford is our service assistant today. So during the service today, the chat function, like always, will be open, and I invite you to extend our hospitality by saying hello to anyone that you do not recognize. You can also leave a message for us. And if you are not already receiving notifications from our church and would like to receive updates on our activities and services, please send an email to me, jessicafriesen876@gmail.com. The order of service for today was sent out over UU Info yesterday, and it includes many announcements. So first of all, please contact Margaret Galbraith if you would like to attend a Sunday service. Her information is in the order of service. Second, Rally for the Climate. Wednesday, September 8th, Canada is on Fire is rallying, and it'll be held across Canada. So there is one in Dartmouth by the ferry terminal at noon, and one in Halifax in the Grand Parade at 3:30. So you can join them to show we want action on the climate. The website is also there for more details. And due to the pandemic, the retreat in August has been postponed. And we are assessing an event at the church once we reach phase 5. So hopefully in September. Also, the new board will resume monthly. The date is 2 TBD. Also, the Saturday brunch will be starting up again for September 11th. And weekly bag lunch preparations will start Friday, September 10th. New volunteers are always welcome, and you can contact Kath Anthony for more information. Also, I want to thank Parker Street Food Bank. They've been generous to our brunch, so please support them if you are able. And sixth announcement, reminder that the in-gathering service is next Sunday, September 12th. This is marking the beginning of a new church year. And we are celebrating a blending of water service, where everyone is invited to add a small amount of water that's meaningful to them to a communal bowl. This symbolizes our creation of community from a diversity of backgrounds. And if you're at home and you can't make it here, then still bring your meaningful glass of water. So the prelude today is We Shall Be Known by Mamuse. It was sung at the UU Assembly by this virtual choir. So please enjoy.
We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is stayed in love.
That was beautiful. And now Brian will read our offertory.
The summer months are often a time of reduced giving. Your early donations are therefore welcome. They can be made by e-transfer to treasurer@uuch.ca or by check mailed to the church. The details will appear on the screen. As always, your donations are necessary and very much appreciated to sustain this community. The words for the chalice lighting are from the Oberlin UU Fellowship. We light this chalice to find inner peace, love for each other, and faith in ourselves. Also, to be welcoming to whomever we meet and kind to all living creatures. So gather around this light of hope as we share this time together.
Thank you, Brian. So Kate has helped me here. She lit the chalice. And now we'll hear from the Unitarian Fellowship of Peterborough's choir. It's called the Mosaic Choir. Please sing along to Spirit of Life at Home.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots holding close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
So Leslie Robinson will now speak on land and reconciliation as well as climate crisis.
Good morning, everyone. Again today, we acknowledge that we stand on the unceded lands of the Mi'kmaq people, who have cared for the earth and all their relations for many generations. Our September worship theme is Embracing Possibility, and that is exactly what we need to do in order to slow down global warming and climate change. What can we do differently for the benefit of planet Earth and all our creatures? Well, there are many examples. I'd like to give you a couple. For example, in southern Spain, in an area known as the Sea of Olives, 70 million olive trees stretch to the horizon. Traditionally, the land between the vines is plowed to get rid of the weeds. But this has led to a lack of biodiversity and poor soil. And so a pilot project began, selected 20 olive farms to adopt regenerative agriculture. This allowed the grass and wildflowers to flourish between the trees. Local species were planted, nest boxes installed, and ponds were created, producing both environmental and economic benefits. Then bees, birds, and green undergrowth thrived, and 600 other growers are now signing on to this idea and this initiative. Similarly, in Eastern England, farmers have been encouraged to dedicate some of their land to nature in an unexpected way, just by farming in straight lines, because the fields are not naturally straight. And this means that then by farming in straight lines and grids of rectangles, the conventional fields, they now have wild edges and corners, which can be filled with flowers and tiny wildlife. In this way, the farmers are using less machinery, which reduces greenhouse gas emissions. And now more than 80 farmers have pledged to devote 20% of their land to nature. And in addition, there have been commitments from schools, churchyards, council, gardeners, and a railway company which has pledged to rewild more than 50 railway stations. It's a growing international movement, rewilding for nature. So what if we joined this idea? What if we got on this train of rewilding? Could we embrace the possibility of allowing nature to do its thing, with the benefit of boosting biodiversity and reducing the atmosphere? Take our lawns, for example. Yes, the lawns that are everywhere in our neighborhood. Why do we spend so much time and effort using carbon emitting laws and simply growing grass? Do we need all this grass? Do we need such a big space that we carefully manicure to perfection? What if we just let most of the grass grow tall? And what if we let the wildflowers flourish? And what if we let the insects and birds thrive in this new environment? Let's embrace the possibility of a greener neighborhood for all our relations.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm excited to present a story for Time for All Ages, partly because we haven't had many stories this summer. Marie-Claude, we've missed you. So the First Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco will now present the story of the 8th principle.
What is the 8th principle? Well, you know our 7 principles, right? They're things that matter to us. Things that guide how we are as a community, how we treat each other, and what we want to bring more of into the world. Just like each of us is always learning and growing, we know our principles have to grow sometimes too. This is the story of the 8th principle. A few years ago, some UU leaders spoke up. They told us these principles we love, they left something out. Like many who'd come before them, they spoke about how people still aren't being treated fairly because of the color of their skin, or where they come from, or other things that make them who they are. And that happens not only in the world at large, but even in our congregations, even in this one. So we need to do more to make sure that all people can feel welcome and loved here. We need to say more about our commitments to fight against racism, because racism hurts everybody. In fact, it hurts all 7 of our principles. And so, the 8th principle was born. The 8th principle is a commitment to fight against racism and oppression, and to build a beloved community of love and trust and belonging here in our church and in the world around us. We're going to be talking about the 8th principle a lot this spring, learning about it and what it means for this community. What does the 8th principle mean to you?
This is a sacred time in our service, a time set apart to honor the many sorrows and the many joys that you, the congregation, are living, and to acknowledge the mutual support of our community. Today, Caitlin is going to help me light the candles. So we will light one candle for all those who are here with us or in our thoughts, who are struggling mentally, physically, financially, or emotionally. And we will also light a candle for the joys that are in the room, the big joys that come along only infrequently, and the little joys that we are blessed by every day if we are able to see them. So we have another joy in the congregation. Pam Berman is celebrating the birth of her first grandchild. So congratulations, Pam. Dale Beaumont was born on Sunday, August 29th. He's 7 pounds, 6 ounces, and Pam's daughter, Jessie, and the baby are doing really well. Thank you. So later when we stop the live streaming on YouTube and before the coffee hour begins, I will invite anyone else who has a joy or a sorrow to light a candle if they would like to do so. So for our reflective hymn, Melanie Demore will be singing Sending You Light.
I am sending you light to heal you, to hold you. I am sending you light to hold you in love. 'Cause I am sending you light to heal you, to hold you. I am sending you light to hold you in love. I walk the path with you. Go slow, dear one, don't hurry. I'll go just like you need to go. There is no need to worry, 'cause I am sending you light to heal you, to hold you. I am sending you light to hold you in love. I am sending you light to heal you, to hold you. I am sending you light to hold you in love.
May the joys and sorrows, both those acknowledged here this morning and those held in the silent sanctuary of our hearts, weave us together in the interdependent fabric of community. Reverend Julie Stoneberg and Beverly Horton are members of the CUC study group on dismantling racism. We will be studying this proposal in preparation for a national meeting in November. So this is an excellent opportunity to hear some of the background that led to this proposal. In between part 1 and 2 of the reflection, Lee Morris and Heart Open Choir will present the song Heart Wide Open. So enjoy this very important message on the 8th principle.
I can't even tell you when I first met Beverly Horton, my conversation partner today. Beverly's a member of our congregation in Hamilton and serves as co-chair with me on the CUC's Dismantling Racism Study Group. I have sure gotten into the habit of we have sure gotten into the habit of long and regular phone calls, Zoom meetings, and texts. I feel so privileged to work with her. She's smart and funny and committed to this faith, and it's such an honor to have her with us today. Welcome, Beverly. I know, because we could talk about this for hours, and we don't have that kind of time this morning. but maybe you'd like to share a bit about how we got into this work together.
So the story about how we got into this work together seems to shift each time I say it slightly. So sometimes it started as a coffee date, but whichever way I tell it, it involves dinner and a beverage. What I remember most clearly is that after the 8th principle was brought forward for the discussion at the GA in New Orleans, we found each other, excuse me, had a meal and had an animated conversation about what the 8th principle might look like and what it would mean in a Canadian context. It was clear to me,
well, to us really,
okay, that in Canada, where racism is fundamentally different,
well, or is perceived to be fundamentally different,
fair enough, different from the US in its meaning and impact, the 8th principle would need,
or at least might need,
to be approached and articulated differently. But I've been wondering, Reverend Julie, why do you care about the 8th principle? I mean, it might seem obvious to some why I do, but why does it matter to you?
Well, that's a hard question to answer. I mean, on one level, I just do. Why or how do any of us choose what matters to us? But to drill down into it, for me, I think it actually started in my fundamentalist upbringing and not being able to understand how some people were saved and others weren't. And that question has taken me on a lifelong journey, going deeper and deeper into how we belong, how we're included, and why some are excluded and used and often even abused. And part of why I became a Unitarian Universalist had to do with this faith's commitment to justice. And I'd have to say that making a commitment to this faith has again taken me deeper into more and more layers of understanding about the many injustices in our world, and particularly in our white supremacy culture. So you say it might be obvious why you care, but do you care about the 8th principle just because you're Black? I mean, is that the right reason or the only reason?
That's a seemingly simple question that requires a rather complicated answer. It definitely requires a yes and response. On the personal level, the because I'm Black level, Bruce Pollock Johnson and Paula Cole Jones, the co-authors of the 8th principle, have called us as Unitarian Universalists to acknowledge that dismantling racism is spiritual work. They set out the path to building Unitarian Universalism as a diverse, multicultural community of communities. Because I'm Black, racism has an impact on how I am and move in the world. White people can choose to deny or ignore racism. I can't. Once a white person has denied, ignored, or minimized the reality of racism, there's no perceived need for introspection, no need to consider the meaning and impact of racism on themselves and those considered to be other. When asked what Unitarian Universalism is, our tendency is to go through what Unitarian Universalism is not speech. But once that wave of reactivity has passed, it is our principles that we turn to articulate what Unitarian Universalism is, what we believe, and who we are as Unitarian Universalists. The principles are the basis for being in right relation with our world and with one another. I believe that being in right relation with Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color in our faith community and in the world around us requires us to name anti-racism as part of Unitarian Universalist belief, part of what it means to be Unitarian Universalist.
So what you're saying is that white folks haven't experienced racism and many haven't experienced oppression. So our mostly white congregations haven't seen a need for anti-racism work. I mean, what's been your experience of this as a Unitarian Universalist, like in your congregation?
So I can make a more concrete answer to your question by telling a not so little story about an experience that I've had. So shortly before times, I presented a workshop at the Association for UU Music Ministries, in which I talked about hymnals as musical articulations of theory and religious culture. That discussion was primarily an intellectual exercise, but not too long ago, I realized that I'd actually had a very personal experience of what I called in the workshop the 154 dynamic in Unitarian Universalism. But let's understand that in a second. I remembered singing "No More Auction Block for Me," hymn 154, and I think we also sang "Oh Freedom," which is hymn 156, as congregational hymns one Sunday. I remember the discomfort of being a Black woman singing, "And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave," in a church full of white people. The notion that slavery was being used metaphorically in this hymn seemed strangely reasonable actually at the time, even though I had an unsettled feeling in the pit of my stomach. As it calls Unitarian Universalists to dismantle racism in ourselves and our institutions, the eighth principle gives language to that pit of my stomach unease. The eighth principle calls us to dismantle racism, dismantle the system that results in slavery being used as a metaphor in our carefully curated musical expression of Unitarian Universalist theory, theology, and values.
Oh, I hear you. We have really got to get more aware of all the implicit biases within our movement, in our hymnal, everywhere. It's so important for us to hear this very personal experience you had and to understand that personal experience can't be formed in isolation. So it's both the unique experience of one person and a kind of universal experience. And I suppose that means that the very real experience of racism in one place can be assumed to be indicative of racism in many places, maybe all places. I read something that Paula Cole-Jones wrote in response to a question about why the eighth principle focuses on racism. She said that anti-racism is a wedge issue. And it's the only wedge that can break up white supremacy culture, which of course is synonymous for us in Canada with settler colonialism. And she also said that breaking down those long established systems and ways of thinking is the pathway to dismantling all types of oppression.
Yes, that's what the eighth principle says. It calls us to dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. So my answer to the other reason part of my initial response to your question about the importance of the eighth principle has to do with the intersectionality of race with other oppressions. In a recent episode of Abram X. Kindy's podcast, Be Anti-Racist, he talks about and talks with disability activist Rebecca Coakley about the historical intersection of racist and ableist. Thank you. Wrong, yes. Accent on wrong syllable. And I wrote it out phonetically for that very reason. They talked about disabled people being disproportionately represented in police-involved murders, and Black people being disproportionately represented in the number of disabled people murdered by the police. They talked about white settlers' assertions that Indigenous people were mentally and physically incapable of adapting to so-called civilization, rendering them incapable of being stewards of their land and justifying their forced removal from that land. They talked about the diagnosis of feeble-mindedness, right, that was used to justify the sterilization of Black and Indigenous women. A little bit heavy for a Sunday morning service, but I think necessary history to bring forward.
Well, the conversation between folks who are engaged in anti-racism work and folks who are engaged in other anti-oppression work is very alive and rich. There's so much packed into what may seem like simple words to accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions.
That's right.
Yeah.
The original articulation of the eighth principle includes what some of us are identifying as a kind of preamble. It reads, to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community, by our actions that dismantle racism in ourselves and others. Dismantling racism is spiritual work. The CUC's Dismantling Racism Study Group chose to leave out the preamble for reasons too lengthy to get into here.
Yeah, but I really don't want us to forget that preamble entirely, because anti-racism definitely has relational and spiritual elements at its core.
Yeah, the eighth principle is all about beloved community.
So what does the eighth principle mean to you? Let's pause for a bit of music.
Keep your heart wide open, though the waves won't push you around. You got to keep your heart wide open till your faith brings you back to solid ground. I'm gonna keep your heart, I'm gonna keep wide open, I'm gonna keep my heart wide open. Though the waves want to push me around, though the waves want to push me around, I'm gonna keep your heart, I'm gonna keep wide open, I'm gonna keep my heart wide open until my faith brings me back to solid ground, until my faith brings me back to solid ground. I'm gonna keep your heart, I'm gonna keep wide open, I'm gonna keep my heart wide open. Though the waves want to push me around, though the waves want to push me around, I'm gonna keep your heart, I'm gonna keep wide open, I'm gonna keep my heart wide open till my faith brings me back to solid ground, till my faith brings me back to solid ground.
Keep your heart wide open, though the waves want to push you around. You got to keep your heart wide open till your faith brings you back to solid ground. Your faith brings you back. For me, the solid ground of this faith is the covenant that we make with one another to walk together, to support each other's spiritual growth, to act for a just and sustainable world, and to live a life of faith requires something of us. I think we all know that we fall short over and over when it comes to actively affirming and promoting the principles of our faith. That's why it's so important that the word accountably exists within the eighth principle. Don't just say it, do it.
Accountability goes back to what you were saying about Unitarian Universalism being a covenantal faith, invested in right relation, invested in how we engage with one another, how we treat one another. Racism does harm to Unitarian Universalists of color. For to many, that harm causes them to abandon Unitarian Universalism. Being in right relation with people of color requires being anti-racist. Moreover, identifying ourselves as Unitarian Universalists and being identified by others as an anti-racist faith gives us relevance in a world that's finally awakening to the realities of systemic racism and the need to dismantle that system.
And that brings us back to keeping our hearts wide open, right? Opening up, listening, being humble. As someone who's lived in a white bubble for most of my life, I know this can be challenging because it's hard to see it when it's not personally felt. I mean, we've had these beautiful 7 principles in a package for about 35 years. And for those of us who might not suffer from oppression or discrimination, they seem like enough. I mean, they do talk about respect for one another and about justice.
Yes, well, it's the difference, though, between all lives matter, our first principle on a conceptual level, and making all lives matter in an authentic way.
And well, actually, our principles have changed several times over the centuries. For example, a 7th principle was added to reflect an expanded understanding of the relationship between men and women and the relationship between humans and the environment. And it was women who brought that awareness to the table as a groundswell who pushed for a change.
That's right. Our principles need to be living, evolving expressions of our belief, and they need to be responsive to the times. If we're going to be a place where all kinds of bodies find nourishment and sustenance, we need to get explicit about who we want to be.
Yeah, this is definitely a moment in time when there's an opening, an opportunity, a window. The world needs us. People are searching for meaning and purpose. There's so much destruction and harm happening. And I really believe we can be a place of healing and building strong, loving relationships. And I really don't want us to miss this chance. I mean, why wouldn't we want to do anything we can to be the people who are truly radically inclusive and interculturally competent? I think it's time for those of us who are white to absorb some of the pain and shock so that those who are marginalized and oppressed don't have to continue to do so. And while I'm feeling somewhat optimistic about the CUC vote in November, sometimes I get pretty worried about what will happen if the 8th principle is voted down. I don't want us to be known as the people who cared more about words and process than about people and relationships, especially when those people are being hurt and asking for change.
Yes, and I worry what will happen is that many people will give up on Unitarian Universalism, and many won't find us if we don't do this. Ask disillusioned Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color. Ask the equally disillusioned, or at least deeply concerned youth and young adult UUs. For many of them, the 8th principle functions as the litmus test of our individual and denominational commitment to racial justice and radical welcome. Unitarian youth and young adults are both the denomination's present and its future. The continued relevance of our faith depends on demonstrating to UU youth and young adults who tell us what they want and what they need Unitarian Universalism to be now and in the future. A faith that proudly names itself as anti-racist and anti-oppressive, a liberal religion where inherent worth and dignity is real.
So we want to leave you with this question about what the 8th principle means to you, and more importantly, what it can and will mean to this faith and for the future of all of us.
All of us.
Yes, all of us.
I hope you enjoyed that talk. I also want to add a last minute thing. The CUC youth have had a forum about the 8th principle. It was on August 7th. And there is going to be testimonials shared widely within the Canadian UU community. So please watch for that. And our closing hymn One Voice was written and originally sung by the Canadian group the Wayland Jennies, and today we're going to hear it sung by the First Unitarian Church of Hamilton. If you know the words, sing along at home.
This is the sound of one voice, one spirit, one voice. The sound of one who makes our choice. This is the sound of one voice. This is the sound of one voice. This is the sound of voices too. The sound of me singing with you, helping each other to make it through. This is the sound of voices too. This is the sound of voices too. This is the sound of voices three, singing together in harmony, surrendering to the mystery. This is the sound of voices three. This is the sound of voices three. This is the sound of all of us, singing with love and a will to trust. Leave the rest behind, it will turn to dust. This is the sound of all of us. This is the sound of all of us. This is the sound of one voice, one people, one voice, a song for every one of us. This is the sound of one voice. This is the sound of one voice.
As I extinguish the chalice, Brian will read We Keep Its Light in Our Hearts by Maddie Stefantos.
We extinguish this flame, but we keep its light in our hearts with its message of love and justice, taking it outside these walls to the world we live in until we are together again.
Thank you who all attended here in the sanctuary, by Zoom or by YouTube. I will say goodbye to those who joined us on YouTube now as we end our live streaming. And for those who joined by Zoom, in a few minutes we will return to share joys and sorrows, followed by our virtual coffee hour. The streaming service will now end.